Hey guys, this is Melissa from Practically Creative. I am going to work on my 3-yard quilt today, the Time Machine from Donna Robertson. I was too ill to work on it with Donna and Colleen when she did it live. So I'm going to go ahead and work on mine today, and I'll walk you through anything that I found that might be an issue. I've already done a little bit of the sewing on it, so I do know that there are a couple things I want to make sure that I point out for you whenever you do yours. So let's get started. So here's what I've got for my 3-yard quilt so far. I've got the binding made. I'm going to set that out of the way. I have cut all of the pieces and squared up all of my half square triangles. And I laid them out on the design board the same way that Donna did, but I realized that all of these are the same. So if I lay these out the way they're supposed to go, it looks like this. And I can lay them this way and get my squares. So I'm going to go ahead and put these together. And I've got all my blocks put together. I'm not pressing them because when I go to sew them together, I want to nest the seams. So I'm just laying these down here. And then we're going to go over to the sewing machine and I'll show you how to put the blocks together. And we'll just do this real quick on the sewing machine. Over at the sewing machine, I have got some of these HSTs sewn together, and then I'm going to press the HSTs so that they go opposite directions. So I've got this one pressed towards the back of the machine. I'm going to bring this one up here and I'm going to press it towards the front. And I'm just finger pressing it. I pressed and starched this fabric before I started, so it's definitely well pressed and well starched. And then I'm going to nest these two center seams. That's what I want to match. I'm not as worried about these edges matching, although if you've squared them up right, they should all match perfectly. And then I'm going in here and I'm using a 1/4 inch seam. I have my machine set to a straight stitch, and I have a 2.5 inch stitch length on this. Now what I've been doing is I'm chain piecing things together. So when I put my HSTs together, I just make sure everything lines up. I'm making sure that those two seams are together. And I pressed mine the same direction. Probably would have been a good idea to press them different directions, but I didn't think about that. And it doesn't seem to affect the block. So I'll show you that one more time. I picked them up so that the two darker fabrics are in the center. And then I'm going to put it together. And I'm sewing so that my seams are sewn down. Just want to match everything up really well. And then do your HST. And if you do it this way, it works out really well because you can do a block and then a couple of HSTs. And there's my block. That's the hourglass block for this quilt. Now I'm not worried about matching fabrics on these. These are little notions that just flit around, so that's all I'm worrying about there. And then again, I'm going to do another one of the hourglasses. I'm going to press one seam so it goes one direction, and then the seam on the other half so it goes the other direction. So when I lay it down, I'm just finger pressing it. This is a straight edge, so I could push on that. If I was doing these, I would use the iron because I don't want to accidentally stretch that seam. That's cut on the bias. Nest my seams, put it together. One thing to be careful of whenever you get down here to the center where everything matches together. I'm trying to separate that. Is you want to see where your point is, and you may have to fudge a little bit on that 1/4 inch seam allowance so that you don't lose your points. Honestly, nobody's going to see it from far away, but I don't like to lose my points if I can help it. So let's take these two out of here. And I'm just snipping the threads in between them. I'm not actually cutting any fabric. There we go. That goes there. And you can see that I still have my points because I stayed away from that edge. So I still got my points in there, and it looks really good. Now the next thing that you want to do is refer to this page, and it shows you the quilt layout that you're looking for. Now I have sewn rows 1 and 2 together already, and I'm starting row 3. So I need 3 blocks. So I need, to make this row, I need 3 of my blocks that are created already, and I need 2 of my focus fabric. And this fabric really doesn't have an up and down, but I kind of am trying to keep things in an orientation that I like. And so if I'm going to look at this block and the first thing I'm going to see is that man, then I'm going to make him stand up. Your half square or your hourglass block should finish at the same size as your feature fabric pieces that you pre-cut, and mine did, so my seam allowances are good. And then I'm just gonna go right down through here and sew this together. If you're more organized than me, you may be able to lay it all out and sew 2 rows together at once. I get confused if I do that, so I'm doing this the Melissa way. So that's my first block up and down, like the book calls for. My next block needs to be up and down, and it's going to go right here. And I'm just working from left to right, adding each block as I go. And these aren't big rows since I'm just doing a throw size quilt. It'll finish at 44 by, or 44 by 58. I am doing a back stitch at the beginning and end of these blocks because I don't want them to separate if I hang them on my design wall while I make the next row. Once again, up and down. This is face up. I'm gonna look at this one, same guy. I want it standing up, so I'm gonna attach it here. And make sure that everything is straight, and then I'm going to sew this on. This part is all straight stitch sewing. When you get it done, it's going to look like you did a really complicated, crazy deal, but it's really not hard. It just looks complicated, which is the beauty of these patterns. They make you look like you're a wild and crazy great piecing person, when what you really did was cut and followed directions. I like the 3-yard quilt patterns just because of that. And here we go. Let's start this one. I'm going to make sure that everything is straight. And you'll notice that if my seam is already ironed down a specific direction, then I'm going to make sure it lays down in that same direction. That That makes for less lumps and bumps whenever I go to put it together, or when I go to free motion quilt this. Okay, so that is the row put together. And again, I'm not worrying too much about which way I put the row together, because I'm now going to join it to the rows that I've already made. It's to be horizontal, and once again, if you've done this correctly, everything will line up and it will be the same size. Still using that 2.5 stitch length and a straight stitch. Make sure my ends match and just keep sewing. I'm trimming my threads as I go because I don't want to have them caught in my seams. So that's the first one. The next one is horizontal as well. So I'm going to open it up, finger press. The direction that the hourglasses go is a big deal, so make sure you pay attention to that. The reason I keep mentioning it is because I have messed it up twice. It's not so bad when you have to pull out a seam on a little block, but when you're having to pull out a seam on a whole row, that's a pain. One thing to remember is if one of your pieces is slightly bigger than the other, put the bigger piece on the bottom when you sew your seam. Your feed dogs will pull a little more on the bottom than on the top, so it will straighten that out and make everything match up just a bit better. Learned that trick from Jenny Doan at Missouri Star Quilt Company. One more horizontal block on here, and you'll notice I'm just finger pressing. The reason I'm just finger pressing is everything on here is starched within 1/4 inch of its life, so I'm not concerned that something is going to wrinkle or roll. There are only 2 rows in this quilt. So there's row 1 with the diamonds horizontal. Excuse me, with the diamonds. There's row 1 with the diamonds vertical, and row 2 with the diamonds horizontal. Since I have a diamonds horizontal, I'm now going to put that above the row that has the diamonds going vertically. And you'll notice that none of the hourglass blocks touch each other and none of the solid blocks touch each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to match these up at that first seam for the first block, and then I'm going to sew this first block. You can pin this. If you're a beginner, I recommend pinning. For this short of a length, I'm not going to pin it, but if you need to pin it, please go ahead and do that. And I wouldn't pin it anyway, I would use clips. But I'm just going to lay everything out here and start sewing the rows together. When I finish one block, I'm just going to go to the next one and match it up. And I am pressing my seams as I go to whichever side they actually wanted to lay at to start with, so I don't end up with twisted seams on the back of my quilt. I know it won't be seen, but it will create bulk when I go to free motion quilt, and I don't like bulk. I don't know of any quilter who does. And I'm just making sure that everything lays flat underneath my needle so that I don't end up with wrinkles or puckers anywhere. Couple of back stitches. Clip my threads. Clip my threads. And so now we have 3 of our rows sewn together. And I'm just going to keep making rows until I get all of this done. And I'll bring you back when I'm ready to add borders. This is where we're at with our 3-yard quilts. It is ready to have borders put on it, and all of the blocks are turned the right direction. Part of the reason I started the video is to make sure that they are. I'm cutting the size that I want for it. I'm doing 2.5. That's not what's called for in the quilt, but I like the 2.5 inch wide border better than the size that she calls for. And I may have made a miscut somewhere along the line. That means I need to do slightly skinnier borders. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the selvage ends off of my, with the fabric strips, and then I'm going to sew all of these together and put them around the quilt. It's ready. And all I'm doing is I'm pressing all of the borders away from the quilt top. And the first thing I'm doing is just a quick straightforward press. And then I'm going to take some of my starch. I'm going to go right along through there, and I'm going to iron it. I've been cutting and removing threads as I go, but I still have threads. I am going to give the iron, I'm going to give a quick iron to the top, but it doesn't need starch, it just needs a press because I've been handling it. And then I'm going to turn the quilt top so that I can go to the next border. Same thing, a quick press just to make it all lay down. You can see that I pieced my border, which pretty much happens. I sewed all the strips that I cut for border together and then just let the seams fall where they may. The only thing I was concerned about as far as those strips is just making sure that none of the seams ended up like right from the corner out to the other seam. A little bit of starch, give it another quick press. This fabric is busy enough that it looks like I matched it up even when I didn't. Putting this border on, it keeps me from having to hold it or to flap it around a whole lot while I am sewing. It keeps me from having to hold it or flap it around a whole lot while I'm sewing, so I don't have to have this weight on my shoulder. So let me show you how I do this. I'm going to move the ironing board right up to the sewing machine, and I've got it set so it's just above the edge of my counter here. I have it set so the ironing board is just above the edge of my counter, and that means that the ironing board isn't going to shake and wiggle on me. So we're going to go ahead and do this, and I will show you exactly how it helps me. Now here's my border, and I'm going to start on the side that's closest to me because that's easy. I still have the same stitch length, and I'm just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam down through here, but you're going to see that this ironing board takes all the weight off of my shoulder. Once again, I'm back stitching a little bit at the beginning, and I could use my counter over here, but the ironing board, since the quilt top is already laid over it, just makes it really easy to keep everything flat and straight. And I can move things around as I want to move them around. And I don't have to worry about the weight of it falling to the floor. And it also helps when I go to flip around to the next section. Since my shoulders are where my arthritis pain lands, it's helpful to me. And I'm not letting the border drag on the floor either. I've just got it kind of folded over the edge of my arm or my forearm so that everything is up off the floor and isn't dragging me down with its weight. It doesn't weigh a whole lot, but believe me, after you work in your sewing room for hours during the day, it's helpful to know a few little tricks to help ease some of the stress that you might get. Just straightening and moving right along, keeping everything lined up in that same 1/4 inch seam allowance. This tip might be helpful also for people who have back pain or neck strain, because the way I'm sitting here, it lets me keep my neck more upright. And you can tell from my seams, I had to Frankenstein my borders up. I couldn't quite get 10 of the strips out of this, so I cut what I had and put it together. Then I move it all back over to the ironing board. I can lay my piece down here. Cut my border very quickly with my rotary cutter. and then just turn it around so I can do the other side. So that's how I use the ironing board to help me handle the weight of the quilt. Okay, so the 3-yard quilt top is done. I've got the borders around it. I changed out that top border row because I had that one long strip of the focus fabric left, and I really wanted to use it rather than have it go into my scrap bin. I think it looks really good on there. I think that my fabric choices came together really well. This will probably be a charity quilt. I don't know. I may put it into my sewing room as my cover quilt because I like covering up with a quilt sometimes when I'm in here. With our air conditioning, it gets really cold in this room. So I may keep it for me. But when you see this again, it will be me free motion quilting it and putting it together, and hopefully it'll be up close and personal for you. But I'm glad that this project is done. I think it looks fantastic, and I appreciate you guys coming along on the journey with me. Have a great day.